Voice of San Diego podcasts are sponsored by the Bob Nelson Charitable Fund, honoring the San Diego Harbor Police Foundation.
Thanks for listening to this Voice of San Diego podcast bonus episode. I'm Scott Lewis, the CEO and Editor-in-Chief at Voice of San Diego. We will have, of course, our normal show coming up this Friday. Andy, Sarah, and I will break down the news of the week like we always do. But I wanted to share this discussion I had recently. It's from our new live stream show. Runs every Monday, every Wednesday, and every Friday at 1:30 p.m. It's called Voice of San Diego at Home. It's on Facebook, it's on YouTube, it's on Twitter's Periscope service. I spoke last week with Laura Kohn. She's a local education advocate and expert, works for the Workforce Partnership. It seems like all of the restrictions from the stay-at-home order are boiling off into one simple one: do not congregate inside. But that's what schools are. I'm very concerned about schools. I have been talking about them at length. There's very little that can go back to normal if schools aren't open. You can't open an economy, for instance, if all the roads are closed or are crumbling because of some earthquake or something. You would want to get the roads fixed. Well, schools are like that. If kids can't go to a place every day, their parents can't work. And if they can't learn skills, they won't be able to work. So here's my chat with Laura about what we're facing right now, what's in the way, what a new reality of schools would feel like, what it would look like, and when it might ever happen. My producer also wants me to be sure to say that this is audio from our live stream, Voice of San Diego at Home. So Laura especially has a little bit of a different sound, a little tingy, a little echoey than we'd usually have for the podcast. Sorry about that, but we thought it was a worthwhile conversation to share. We've got to figure out schools. We've got to figure out childcare. And to do that, I'm going to bring in my friend, Laura Kohn. Laura, hello.
Hello.
She's my go-to expert on all things schools and childcare. She's been doing tons of research before this all happened about the crisis in childcare. And now the entire infrastructure of childcare has vanished. And I assume we can get it back. What do we know right now about how many people in San Diego County, Laura, need childcare?
Well, you know what? It's really hard to know right now how many people in San Diego County need childcare because of the layoffs. And so the estimates that we had before said that we were about 190,000 childcare slots short of what we needed. But I can't tell you at this point what we're short of. I will say, though, that the childcare sector is not shut down. So near as we can tell, about half of the childcare centers, the larger places, are still functioning, and 97% of the family childcare homes are open for business, but they all have reduced enrollment right now. Whether they're open or they're closed, they're teetering on the edge of insolvency and really can't figure out how they'll keep operating in the kinds of conditions and constraints that people are talking about or that are in place right now for childcare. So fewer kids per room, less shuffling between rooms means that they have to staff up at higher levels. They have to clean more. They have health protections in place, and it's all way more expensive than the prior operating model. And they were already operating on the thinnest of margins before. So it's a big crisis.
My understanding is the governor has said that childcare facilities can open right now for non-essential needs. Like we can
That's
have
right.
childcare. Okay.
Yeah.
But one of the problems is that childcare professionals often get paid very little. And if they were on unemployment after this crisis began, if they got on unemployment, they may not be very excited about going back to a job that paid less than unemployment, where they might be in danger of catching a virus. What do we understand right now about that dynamic?
Yeah, two big concerns about the possibility of providing more childcare. Yeah, so one of them is what you just described. The ones that are the workers who are laid off now are being paid unemployment plus that federal bump, and they're making more money than they were making when they were working in childcare. And the second one is that a good chunk of the childcare workers, and I don't know the precise number, but the providers in town tell me it's a good number, are over 65, or are at greater risk of COVID infection or of severe consequences of COVID infection. And so they may not want to come back. We may not, think it's a good idea to encourage them to come back. So staffing up is really a big worry, a huge worry right now.
Am I right to be freaked out about schools right now?
Yes, you should be freaked out. I am too, because it's not figured out. There are no easy answers. There's not much guidance coming down from CDE. Every district appears to be figuring it out for themselves. They're talking to one another and talking things over, but there's no obvious model for how to run schools in this context. So the one thing I can say that is encouraging is that we've got countries in Europe that have opened their schools already, and Asia as well. And so by being behind them in the COVID crisis curve, we're going to be able to watch what happens, how they approach it, but also whether infection nodes come out of the reopening of those schools.
Well, one thing American educational leaders are very good at is taking lessons from overseas, right?
No,
I kid the leaders. They're doing a lot of work. But I think that one of the things I'm trying to understand is, do you think that we're going to try to make the best of social distancing and distance learning? Or do you think we're going to just hold off until it's okay to go back to school with minor modifications? I feel like there's two competing groups of people. There's one that says this is a lost time, cut it off, make up the time in the future with summer school or longer hours or longer years, forget about it. And then there's another group that's saying, no, enhance this distance learning. We don't know when this is ever going to get over. We need to make sure that people can learn now. And are those truly two competing camps, or is there margins on both?
I'm not hearing it as competing camps. I'm hearing it as scenario planning. Yeah, I think that the districts that I've talked to are planning to open in the fall, considering how they can start to do staged opening or experimenting with things in the summer, but planning to open in the fall in the adapted versions or scenarios that we could talk about. But if COVID got worse over the summer, or if there were some evidence from those other countries that reopening, even in adapted circumstances, was causing explosions in the virus, then they would have to go to the other version of trying to make do with distance learning. But in the meantime, kids are losing learning, for real. And whether it's, kids of privilege, parents tell me they feel like their kids are at best frozen in their learning time. But kids from more challenged circumstances where parents are still working, where their learning conditions are way less than ideal, they're undoubtedly losing ground. That's what happens every summer. We used to call it the summer slide, and this is going to be a massive COVID slide. So the urgency to shore up learning for those kids and try to do some adapted version of schooling for all of us and for the working parents is super high.
Let me ask you this. Let me put out two facts and see if you agree, or two strong opinions laced with facts.
All right.
See if you agree. One, distance learning, this idea of there being a hub of communication that helps parents facilitate the teaching of their kids with all these technological platforms, is a nightmare for working parents. True or false?
Totally true. I mean, I haven't heard anything different from anyone, whether you're a parent who has the luck to be able to work from home, being a work from home worker and being a teacher and taking care of your house, et cetera. It's too much. And it is a nightmare. If you're still working outside the home, then nightmare also, because you're not there to help your kid and they're struggling along or not. And if you're unemployed, then you're really, on Maslow's hierarchy, you're really worried about your survival, and the likelihood that you're able to be the best teacher to your kids while you're also trying to be the best parent and make ends meet is not so high. I know there's some parents that are rising to this occasion, it's working out for them, but I think we can agree that it's in the way minority.
So the second part of this fact-laced opinion is this question of, I don't think it seems impossible. It is impossible to socially distance 6 feet apart in schools, kids who are 6 to 15 years old. I cannot picture any school setting where you could manage to keep people apart. I look at our school, and it's an old school, so maybe it's not designed in the same way, but there is no part of that school inside where those kids could separate. The school rooms are small. There's choke points all over the place. The idea that you would have any significant number of students there and socially and keep them 6 feet apart is absurd to me. I am so tired of hearing people say that, because it seems like they don't even have never been to one of these types of schools. Yeah. Am I wrong? Could you imagine having kids separated in a school like that?
My imagination was aided by going to visit Cajon Valley School District's newly reopened childcare program a couple weeks ago. So it's been going now that was during its first week. It's been going now, it's in its third week. And they had it for those kids, which is a small number, but still seeing it as an experiment. The kids were pretty compliant with staying apart from one another. They weren't doing any group projects. All the stuff you did was on your own. They weren't sharing any equipment, including jump ropes. Everybody had their own jump rope. So I think there are ways that you can increase the distance between the kids, beyond what's normal by a significant amount, but it only will work if we stretch out the day. So there's just no way to do social distancing on our campuses unless you have kids in shifts, basically. That's the only possibility, whether it's certain days or parts of days. Otherwise, it definitely won't work. And I'll just add that California has really high class sizes relative to other places in the country. And so the challenge for us, because we've been tolerating these high class sizes for all this time, is going to be higher than it is for other schools.
Yeah. I mean, what you're saying is like you would basically make class sizes a third or a half of what they are.
Right.
And that's, that's not going to happen. Right. I mean, there's no way.
My teacher, and she had it all figured out in her mind. There's going to be a morning shift and an afternoon shift. Teachers would take their planning time in the middle when kids are eating lunch. So your school day would be half as long. Okay. But you would see half the kids, and you would just repeat the curriculum morning and afternoon. Other school districts probably can probably conceive of a more nuanced, sophisticated approach where kids come on for certain things and off for others. It's going to be a really complicated dance is what it comes down to. And that's without touching the need for working parents to be at work.
Counterpoint. What if we just go back to school? Should we not just wait until it's okay to be together? And are we concluding though that that's just too long? But let me.
Yes, we're concluding that that's too long. I'm married to a guy working on a COVID vaccine.
Yeah.
He has. He's very cautious about the timing until a vaccine is available, unless we get really lucky with the first ones out of the chute. But
so it would be. Do you think it's accepted as consensus that there is no normal school until there's a vaccine,
or a very successful treatment? Correct.
And that's the consensus, not just that. You think that's what the administrators are operating off of?
Absolutely.
Oh God.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's a gut punch.
The only other unless I can add is there's some question about how effective or ineffective kids are at transmitting the virus.
Exactly. Like, can we get to that's what you're talking about. Europe, there's a lot of like Denmark and other places that are figuring out or saying the kids are so unsusceptible to or whatever, they're not vulnerable to this to the point that they can be together.
There's
And
evidence at this point, really mixed. I've looked really carefully at it because it's a crux question, and it's not conclusive. So it's good. Again, it's good for us that other people are trying. I will say though, towards the optimistic side, that as I said, there is still childcare operating in San Diego County, and has been throughout the pandemic or the epidemic. And I'm not aware of any COVID nodes emanating out of any of those childcare centers. So that's promising.
Let me draw out a nightmare for you, or a nightmare to some people.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that the decision is, like San Diego State, that schools will not start on in live settings in the fall. That they make a decision, that San Diego Unified and LA and the state decide, hey, we're not going back to campuses in the fall. We're going to do this distance learning. And let's say that there's a lot of parents who've had a horrific time managing that over the last couple months, look at that announcement and say, well, I'm going to go look at some of these online charter schools or homeschool platforms that have already been established. They've been working on this problem for a long time, and they at least know, in some cases, how to manage the internet better than what we've experienced so far. I'm going to go to them. So we have this situation. Cindy Martin, the superintendent of the San Diego Unified School District, and Austin Butner, the superintendent of the LA Unified, two biggest school districts in the state, wrote in Cal Matters yesterday. We can post the link. They said this is the worst financial crisis or worst crisis in the history of California schools. And so they say that we can't do everything we're supposed to do to get ready for this year with a 20% cut or whatever they're looking at in financing for this situation. And we have to do more with less, basically. They're saying we have this giant deficit and we're gonna have to do smaller class sizes, some distancing, whatever. We're gonna have to do some sort of device. And then what if you add to it 10, 15, 20%, 30% of other kids whose parents decide, actually, we're going to go to this charter school or we're going to go to this home school platform? What if that happens? I mean, are we going to start to see a dissolution of the school system unlike we've ever seen?
I mean, that sounds like a realistic scenario to me. Parents will do what's best for their kids and for themselves, as long as they have those choices available to them. And as you know, and hopefully the listeners know, the money follows the student.
Exactly.
Suppose the state could protect. They could. I mean, I know money's scarce, but they could decide to backstop the enrollment of the school districts. They could freeze it at the 1920 levels and protect them against that kind of exodus. But that's just more. That's more money. That's taking a chunk of money that needs to be spent somewhere in the COVID crisis and putting it there. But it would stave off the dissolution of the school districts as your nightmare scenario.
So, I mean, if you were a parent, like we're, and we do get that announcement that says, at least for September through January, we're not going to do classes. You're not going to come on campus. You're going to have to continue this distance learning.
Yeah. Everybody understands this is a what if.
This is a what if. This is not. By the way, that's a problem right now. You have Gavin Newsom saying like, hey, we're going to open schools in July or something. And everybody freaks out. It was an offhand comment. And you have that lady, the public health officer in LA saying, we're not going to get out of the stay at home thing for 3 months. Turns into this national news, CNN, everything. It's like, whoa. Stop with the offhand comments, powerful people. Stop with the offhand comments, especially
there's ambiguity about whose decision it is. There's absolutely ambiguity about that, and that's what's fueling this confusion. But okay. So if we do have to confront a distance learning scenario in the fall, which is hypothetical right now, how would you advise parents to start to decide whether they can handle it and how to manage it? And should they be thinking about,
these homeschool platforms or these other more developed online educational systems?
I mean, parents don't know what their own work situation is going to be in September. It's really hard to game these things out because of all the different variables. So one of them is what your own situation will be. Will you be going to the office in the fall? Will you be welcome?
Not if my kids are home,
but not required to go to the office? Will you still have a job when September comes? And then the other thing that parents will want to be calculating is as I was mentioning before, there's big variation amongst school districts in the level of sophistication of their distance learning approaches. There's variation between schools, among schools within school districts, and there's variation from teacher to teacher to teacher. So who your child is assigned to for next year and that teacher's skill level, and of course they don't tell you that till the day before, but that teacher's skill level at managing learning and supporting learning in a distance way is another factor that parents would want to look at. I know, some parents are planet headers and will get out in front of that, I suppose. We'll decide no matter what the form of the 2021 school year is, I think I'll be better off in this homeschool environment or this charter that's better at it. That's definitely possible. But
what would you need to see to be able to say it's okay to go back to school? Like, and what could you do to make, I had this idea that I've been trying to shop, which is like the only place in my school that I can picture people separating well is outside. Like maybe we just put everybody outside, summer camps outside, everything outside. Is there anything you could do to a school or to the way things work that would make people feel more comfortable about it? Like, what data point would you need to see to be able to say, hey, kids aren't really not only a threat to themselves, but a threat to people they might encounter? What would you need to see to be able to communicate that effectively to people?
So we would need, if we could get evidence that kids were slow transmitters or low transmitters, that would be helpful. If we could see some specific scenarios about how to increase the distance amongst kids, recognizing that it will be imperfect per the comments in the chat. And I think we will be able to get evidence of that. If we could see specific plans from the school districts about how they'll do this blended situation and collaboration between the school districts and the after-school providers so that they can stitch together a full day experience for kids and families, those would be some of the conditions I would look at. And then just generally, what's going on with COVID? Are we sloping down, or have we peaked back up? And there will be shutdowns. So even if we do figure out a scenario and I hope we will, for reopening schools in the fall, if the epidemic picks up in hot spots, we have to be ready for things to shut down quickly. What we want to see is that a COVID node in one school doesn't necessitate the shutting down of all schools in a district or in the county. We'd like, through testing, tracing, and tracking, to be able to isolate any kind of transmission nodes that crop up in schools and shut down that school and protect that community without doing a widespread shutdown.
Well, that's a really interesting point, because one thing about schools is kids get sick all the time, like constantly. Like I was sick I'm still sick all the time. I mean, not now, I guess maybe we should just do this, but sick all the time. And it's going to be terrible when a normal flu or anything breaks out in a school and you have to, it's like our entire view of sickness has been just jostled to the point where like we can't handle anything anymore. It doesn't seem like we're going to have to, like, if somebody gets sick at a school, how do you keep it from getting shut down?
Because, there's going to be rapid testing by the fall. It's going to be saliva testing instead of a nasty swab up your nose.
Okay.
So that kids will be willing to do it. Yeah, the rapid testing is what fixes that problem. There's a problem we can fix.
Does your husband need any help? Should I send some Snickers? He's coming up with a vaccine. Should we send him any help?
The good news is that Scripps Research has is allowing somewhat more intensity of work in the lab starting this week. So he's able to work a little bit faster, and just keep hoping for that.
All right. We did have a question come in. I don't know that either of us can answer this, but do you think there will be enough government assistance, rent relief, mortgage relief, and debt relief for our before our economy collapses? No, I don't foresee them doing. There's a lot of pleas among the school districts asking for state help, and the state is just asked for $2 trillion to support a group of states that they represented. Maybe some of that will come, but it doesn't seem. There's a lot of hostility to it in the Senate, the conservatives and others, and so I don't know that that's coming anytime soon. Have you guys, you deal with federal funding sometime? Have you guys seen any indication that there's more support coming for families or for local governments or anything?
No, we see that the House put out a proposal yesterday, which includes funding for helping people get back to work who've been laid off. But it was a House proposal, and we're as pessimistic as everyone else is about whether the Senate will pick it up.
Yeah. Well, before I let you go, you did a bunch of research before the crisis about the childcare situation, and a lot of the language in there said, like, even with a booming economy, and now that's changed a lot. What was the situation before the crisis as far as people needing childcare who couldn't connect with it?
Yeah. So this report is available at childcare.workforce.org. And although it is contextualized in our booming pre-COVID economy, the basic points that it's making are totally coming home to roost in the COVID context. So we found even at that time that childcare in San Diego County was scarce, inconvenient, expensive, and of really varying quality. And the fragility of that system is totally laid bare right now. But the other thing that's very much elevated, that was one of the main points we were making, is that our childcare system, such as it is an intimate part of our economy. And when it's fragile, that means our economy can't thrive. And that's what we're able to recognize right now, that childcare and the care of our kids is what enables our economy to function, because a huge chunk of our most productive workers are parents of young children, and they have to have childcare in order to work.
Yeah, it really drove me nuts when I started talking about this, when people say, well, that's separate from the discussion we're having about our businesses and their businesses opening. No. Having access to childcare is not separate. And not just for people directly involved with it. It is part of the entire infrastructure. It's like saying roads are separate. Roads aren't separate. They're dealt with by different people, but they're intimately involved in the functioning of our economy.
But we've gotten in a really bad habit here in San Diego in particular of letting someone else deal with childcare, and that someone else being the state and the feds, we think. But they haven't done a very good job of dealing with it. And we haven't done a very good job of both doing what we can here locally to shore it up, but also advocating to the state and federal government about how critical it is for our economy. So I think we're woken up now.
Yeah.
Last week, the county decided to invest the $1 out of its local CARES Act funding for essential worker childcare vouchers, and they challenged the city to match it. And the mayor held a press conference with Councilmember Chris Cate and Supervisor Nathan Fletcher on Friday, saying that they intended to move forward with meeting that match. So this is the first local funding. It's federal funding, but with local discretion that anyone can remember being allocated in San Diego County. So we're awake now, and we're ready to see what we can do to support it.
What was your website for childcare again?
Childcare.workforce.org.
Laura Kohn, you can see why I wanted to have her to talk about this. We'll bring her on as we see developments come on. She's been a close friend of mine for some time. Thank you so much for joining, and good luck, and wish your husband good luck. We send him our collective hopes and dreams.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this Voice of San Diego podcast bonus episode. You can follow Voice of San Diego at Home on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Those air on Mondays and Wednesdays. And of course, if you don't catch it live, they're available to watch anytime on those feeds at Voice of San Diego. And on Fridays, we talk to a Voice of San Diego reporter about their big story for the week. That airs on Instagram. So you can find us on whatever app is your favorite. We're at Voice of San Diego on each one. I'm Scott Lewis, CEO and Editor-in-Chief, and this show is produced by Nate John. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.